Welcome back to the last video in this series on the 2019 revisions to the ICF Code of Ethics. I'm really excited to present part 5, which is about the pledge that coaches take to follow the ethics. And I have with me Michael Marks, and he is one of the folks very active in the code revisions. And so, Michael, thank you for being here.
Absolutely glad to be here. It's an honor to be last. It is a long process that we went through here, and we're really excited about what we produced.
Great. So let's dive right in, and we'll start with part 5, and then we're going to add on a number of things that just were little pieces that we needed to talk about at the end here. So Michael, tell us about part 5, the pledge.
Right. Yeah. Part 5 is where, you've read the code and you say, now I'm ready to sign the dotted line. This is what I'm going to do. And the pledge of the ICF professional, remembering that definition of, a professional being all things mentor, coach, supervisor, trainer, student of learning. This is all in the ICF professional. And in accordance to the ethics and standards, I acknowledge and agree to fulfill my ethical and legal obligations to my coaching clients, sponsors, and the clients and the public at large. So really everybody, keeping in mind that, you need to be really responsible and respectful for your clients and your other coaches, and looking out for the goodwill, the brand, if you will, of coaching. So we're kind of jealous about the name ICF professional, and wanting you to honor that name and keep that name in good standards here, but also go beyond that and include all coaching representatives, because we don't want the name coaching to be tarnished in any way. Now, if someone feels that you've gone too far, they can submit a complaint, and that would go to the IRB. And the IRB is the Independent Review Board. I sit on that, and several of the other people you've seen on this video also. And we will review your complaint. And we usually come up with a pedagogical remedy, as we like to call it, and not a punitive remedy. However, if your violation, basically what we regard as a breach of the code, is grievous enough, we do reserve the right, and you honor that with your pledge to say, yep, that's what you can do, is you can take my membership away, probably temporarily, or my credential, So,
and yeah, actually, Mike, I want to jump in real quick there, is to say that I noticed on the website, there was a report. There's a report issued about kind of what actions have been taken. So that's a nice resource to kind of look at, to say like, oh, this is what has happened to folks in the past. And also, so actually speak to that a little bit. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes. The head of the IRB, who at the moment is Sue McMahon, publishes this report, and it gives not names. Of course, everything is held in strict confidentiality, anonymity. And this is published usually in the first quarter of each year and is available on the website, which describes the activities of the IRB and anything that has affected. We do now also have a committee for reviewing schools called the program complaint process, and that might be included in future ones as well. So any activity of the ethics conduct review, ECR process, will be reported at least once a year on the ICF website to the global board and then released to the public.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for just touching on that, because that was, as I was digging through, I read through that report, and I think it's a great thing for everyone to kind of take a look at. But let's get back to continuing with these great resources that that the ICF.
Right. Where the questions come in mind is like, oh, most of the time, am I doing the right thing? We find ICF coaches are really interested in behaving right, but you got this situation in your head. Am I really, conforming to what I promised I would do in this pledge? And we do have a hotline, what's called an ethics assist line, that you can call, and that number will be appearing here. And you can also send an email to ethics@coachfederation.org. And if the person fielding that email or answering the phone does not have the immediate answer, they will look for a subject matter expert that does.
What else is in, have we not really talked about in the nuts and bolts of ethics here?
Well, one of the things that we find very often in the ECR, the ethics conduct review process, is that agreements known as contracts, depending on which, book you're looking at the time, uh, I like to refer to them as contracts. They are delineated in some samples that we have. We have one for individual coaching clients and one for sponsored relationships, like if you were working with a corporation or with parents. And those examples can be found on the ICF website as well.
Wonderful. So another thing that I saw in your notes was talking about kind of referrals and specifically therapists. So you had a nice resource there that people can find in the description down below.
Absolutely, yeah. We have a white paper on therapy that was done by a comprehensive team of psychologists, coaches, academics, and really spells out very well what to do when you think the client is in need of professional help other than the coach. And each coach, as part of the new code, should know what their boundaries are. And if in the situation where the client needs a little extra professional help, you should also know how to refer.
Yes, that is great. I know we've talked about that a number of times throughout the ethics about referrals. So I know there's also resources you mentioned for schools, but also for chapter leaders.
Yes. Again, on the website, you can find ethical guidelines for chapter leaders. And you, of course, always want to correlate that to the code because, both would be binding for a chapter situation, also for the schools, same thing.
And there's a couple of ways that coaches can get involved if they want to dig in deeper as part of the ethics process. Some of which is a living document. So can you tell us about the the water cooler, the community of practice, and the statements?
Okay, let's start with the interpretive statements. One of the new brainchilds from this review process of the code, the rewriting as such, was, wow, I read the code, it's 2 sentences, it's 3 sentences. I'd like to know more what that really means. So you can go to the interpretive statements and get 2 or 3 paragraphs on each standard. And so that elaborates in more detail. That's also a fluid document. So as we find misinterpretations or reinterpretations of the code, we can go back and tweak that without having an official review process. And the other thing you mentioned, Brighton, was the community of practice. 4 times a year, once per quarter, the community of practice for ethics has a full-blown 4 CCE credit presentation. It's usually of the highest quality. You really want to key in on that. And if you're looking for your CCEs and you need 3 every 3 years to renew your credential, you can get 4 per year if you want 12, just from the community of practice. And then the other one you just mentioned, Brighton, was the water cooler. That is something that we've been doing forever. And we brought it back recently, big time, and it's really fun. We get together once a month in a Zoom call, no agenda, no recordings. Usually we have a couple of things that we have primed up as discussion topics, but for the most part, it is exploring topics. We have some of the ever-present topics that newer folks are saying, how do I do a contract? And the older folks in the room are always longer folks in the room are happy to answer that. And then we get into some deeper stuff in the water cooler. For me, it's one of the highlights of the month. I love talking about ethics, and I love talking about ethics in a very deep level, as long as you're not complaining about me.
I love it. Well, let's talk about those complaints. So, one thing you mentioned was maybe coaches working with other coaches, but what about clients? How do clients, if they notice a coach that's gone through and they're thinking that maybe there's an ethical boundary that's been passed by, what do clients need to do?
Excellent question here. Now, the coach should be sensitive, and the word we like to use is shift, that the coach is sensitive to a shift in the relationship and ask about it. However, what we find in the complaint process is that the client doesn't feel comfortable. So they can contact ICF, they can file a complaint. A coach can file a complaint against another coach. What happens first is that we review it to see, is it an ethical breach complaint, or is it like a small business court complaint? If it gets through that phase and only about 50% of the ones filed actually do, then it goes into a review process, and the complainant, the person complaining, will be informed at the end of the process that there was a breach or there was not a breach, and that's about it. We're not going to use this process to embarrass the coach, or especially not the client. So like I said earlier, confidentiality and anonymity is held very, very high.
Great. Well, who knew that ethics would be so much fun? This has been a great series. I'm wondering if there's any key pieces of advice or knowledge that you want to impart before the coaches watching wrap up this series.
Right. When people ask me about ethical behavior for coaches, I say there's three things. Number one, and first and foremost, respect. If you have respect in your visor, on your radar, in front of you, and you are looking for respect at every turn, the likelihood of there being a breach or of there being even incorrect behavior in any form is very small. Secondly, do what's best for the client. In other words, when you come to an ethical dilemma, and this is usually the problem, is you act before you think. But if you happen to think before you act, you think what is best for the client in the situation. And then the third thing, and this will keep you out of the most ethical hot water, absolutely, is communicate often and deeply with your client. Like I said earlier, we're looking for the coach knowing that there's a shift in the relationship, and you need to communicate with your client. So like at the end of a coaching session, every now and then, ask the client, how is the coaching relationship doing? How are you and I doing? You don't have to ask that every time, but ask it often. And when you notice this shift, suddenly the client's behaving a little differently when you're around, ask about, communicate deeply and often.
Great. That is wonderful advice. So it's a great advice as we wrapped up this series. I would love to know from you coaches how you thought this went. Was this a valuable series for you? And let me know down in the comments below. If you're watching this on the ICF website, feel free to check in with ICF and let them know if this was a valuable resource or what we could do better next time, because the code is updated on an ongoing basis. But thank you so much for watching this series of videos. If you happen to watch this one first, I'll be sure that up here you'll be able to click on the beginning of the series and watch the whole thing through. Otherwise, I hope to see you in another video, and thank you for your contribution and your commitment to ethics.